it. There's a number of, well, there's many suppliers out there. It's quite a robust sector at the moment. There's lots of companies joining in and kind of leveraging the access to satellite data to provide these kind of services. Quite a few of them are untested or unproven. Some of them are very rigorous with their scientific work. One company I spoke to the other day has got over 100 peer-reviewed papers that backs up their kind of Earth observation work. And then this one will probably be very familiar to everybody, even if you don't have a remote sensing background. So aerial drone kind of derived remote sensing. And what we get with drone derived remote sensing, we get very high resolution data. So I've put circa 1 centimeter in there. It can range. That's one of the nice things about drone work, is that you can actually change your altitude and you can change your pixel size, ground sampling distance, or your resolution to suit your need. By contrast to Earth observation, you do tend to get a much smaller coverage when you're doing your work. So typically, if you're working within the constraints of the civil aviation at 500 meters line of sight, you can cover roughly 80 hectares in a flight. It can be low cost, so the equipment and the technology has improved, and the costs have come down significantly in the last few years. So it can be very low cost to go out and collect this data. Equally, it can be high cost, depending on the kind of equipment that you're using. So if you've got something like a LiDAR sensor fitted to your drone, there can be some high initial investment into that equipment. And if you're doing regular updates and going out and trying to collect data multiple times at a single site, then those costs can start to rack up. Fortunately, you're probably going to have less atmospheric conditions to deal with when you're using drone-derived remote sensing. So that's one of the hurdles with satellite-based remote sensing that we don't have to deal with. And the data can be more reliable. And what I mean by reliable is that we've got because of things like remote real-time kinematic GNSS or GPS sensors, we can get very high precision and accuracy in our models and our data, so that the height values and things like that we're looking to get from a forest canopy is going to be very reliable and accurate. By contrast, there's a lot of people that are doing drone-derived remote sensing out in the UK. However, not everybody has got a solid background in forestry or the kind of work that we're looking to do. So there is a low number of suppliers that we've looked at. And then coming on to the ground-based stuff. So this is really probably the biggest revolution, I suppose, or evolution within forestry research, is terrestrial laser scanning. So I've picked this paper because it actually goes back to 2011. So even this has been around more than 10 years. But with terrestrial laser scanning, you can get these very high resolution kind of images of individual trees or forest structure from the ground. And what we're seeing with that is, like I say, this very high resolution data, but it can be expensive and it can be quite cumbersome. And by cumbersome, I mean the kit is quite heavy. And if you're dealing with a young woodland plantation, something around 15 years, say, you might have a lot of undergrowth that you need to kind of fight your way through to try and position it. And it might not actually be a viable solution. However, the data is very reliable. You're getting hundreds, if not more, points per square meter from a terrestrial laser scanner. So it's going to give you a really nice image or three-dimensional product around the tree that you're looking at. And what this enables, and this is kind of another big thing that's happening in research and enterprise at the moment, is bespoke trialometry. So we have got some issues around allometric equations from the past. And so the industry is moving more and more towards bespoke trialometry. One paper in particular is at Wytham Woods in Oxford that a group of researchers did, and they found that looking at this mature stroke ancient woodland, there was actually a serious undercalculation of stored carbon in the above ground biomass from the forest. But that was just a single paper, so there's more and more research going in that direction. There are no cons to full bespoke trialometry, except for all of the effort and things like that needs to go into it, the data storage. And also there's a severe lack of industry ability because it is very specialized kind of work. So where are we up to now? Now, I still haven't seen this film, and this is no critique on the film whatsoever, but just to say, we're at the point where we realize that there is no silver bullet to the work that we're doing at the moment. It's going to be a multivariate or a kind of multi-step process for being able to incorporate remote sensing into the Woodland Carbon Code. Now, if we just take a quick look at the verification process within the Woodland Carbon Code, if we look at the 5-year, this is how we've kind of broken it down to how we could potentially use remote sensing in it. So we're looking at health, we're looking at stem count, and potentially species. And really what we want from a 5-year is to know that the woodland that's been planted is successfully growing as it should be. Please bear with me. For some reason, my presentation isn't working properly. And so for the health side of things, it's fairly binary. There is some work going on with Forestry and Land Scotland, where they're looking to try and do more early detection of stresses and health of trees. But at the moment, if we were going to be looking at remote sensing, it's very much a binary thing when if you've got leaf on, if that tree's dead, then we're not going to see leaf on essentially. And that would be how we would kind of derive whether that tree was healthy or not. Stem counts, again, there's potential when there's leaf on at 5 years. They're they tend to be very small whips or very skinny trees at that stage. So you're not really going to be able to do much more than do a stem count unless there's leaf on. Then we've also got the problem of things like other vegetation, say bracken or willow herb, that can be quite tall. So if your trees haven't grown very much, then it's going to be very hard to distinguish your tree from the ground vegetation. And species, and I'll come on to species a bit later, but full species ID, we're only really going to be able to do that if we know that there's a single species plantation and there's nothing really else to differentiate between it. There could be some potential to differentiate between conifer and broadleaf just because of the different reflectance and spectral ranges in the colour of those trees. And then we'll come to 15 years, and this is kind of like where it starts to get a bit more serious within the Woodland Carbon Code, because on top of what we look for in the 5-year verification, we're also starting to look at the kind of the volume of the trees. We want to be able to assess the above ground biomass so that we can then derive carbon calculations, and species are a very important part of that. And from what we've seen, again, health when leaf on, we can look at that. Stem counts can be done. There's a number of ways in which that's been achieved within the literature, and there are organisations that are already doing this successfully. Again, species, like I mentioned, I'll come to this at the end of the presentation, but this is going to be a really important part of the 15-year verification process, because this is where we derive a lot of our information that helps us calculate what the carbon sequestration of that woodland is going to be. Size, again, I've put some levels of accuracy or effort accuracy in debate, and that's just really to do with LiDAR is very much the gold standard when it comes to assessing a canopy height model. Photogrammetry is very effective, but it's not quite as accurate as LiDAR will be. However, I think it's fairly safe to say that by comparison to someone having to trudge around a woodland and estimate or try and use a laser rangefinder to guess get the canopy height, then it's a much more effective and probably statistically relevant method, either photogrammetry or LiDAR, from that perspective. And so what have we got coming up in this summer sort of autumn period? We're going to be doing a series of trials across Woodland Carbon Code sites. Now, one thing that has been requested of us by some of our clients, and also looking at the numbers that we've got, the 5-year is much more urgent than the 15-year. We've got probably 5 or 6 that we need to do this year as far as 15-year verifications are concerned, but we've got about 120 sites now that are at the 5-year verification stage, and so there is a pressure to try and find a solution that the industry can use. And we'll be looking at predominantly drone derived data, and that's because by comparison to satellite data, the drone derived data is going to be high enough resolution to be able to pick up the features that we want in the 5 or 15-year sites. We will continue to look at the other options, but like I say, it would predominantly be drone derived. And the other things that we need to look at is, how these technologies fit together. Are we looking to prescribe a methodology? Is it going to be a technique, or are we just looking for an end product? It's also going through what already exists within the Woodland Carbon Code and how we can apply that to the remote sensing options that are available, and trying to ascertain what is good enough. And so if we start off with the first one, looking at how these sort of fit together, some of the questions that we're looking at is how can we tie in drone and satellite derived data to fit together? Both of these can potentially produce a huge amount of data, and it's trying to understand at what stage, satellite can take over from drone data as far as the pipeline of verification is concerned. And the data pipeline is really important because from start to finish, there's a huge amount that we have to kind of manage and process and deal with. And so there's a lot of administration. And something else we don't want to do is kind of increase that administration burden as part of this. Next, we're going to go through just very quickly the methodology, technique, or end product, just to give some ideas around the discussions that are happening. So, if we look at methodology, it could be something very prescriptive, as far as, and I'll use this example, an R package, a programming language or statistical language. It might be that there's something out there and we say, okay, that's been tested, it works really well, use this R package to do stem counts, for example. It might be that we define a ground sampling distance or resolution that would be necessary to actually accurately model a woodland compartment or do a count as part of the verification. Could be points per meter squared from a LiDAR product, because not all LiDAR sensors are made equal. It could just be something like convolutional neural network. So that's kind of a machine learning image processing technique that's very popular at the moment. It could be just saying that anyone that uses a CNN machine learning approach to doing stem counts, that's acceptable. We're really comfortable. The standard deviation that's produced in those is acceptable. It doesn't matter which one you use, but if you use that, great. Or it could be that we just say you've got an RTK enabled drone. We know that that accuracy is going to be precise enough. We just need a canopy height model. We need some derived calculations and an ortho photo with some stem counts, and that'll be great. Send in the report that your photogrammetry software has produced, and we can go through that and tick it off. We're not sure yet, but these are the kind of questions that we're asking at the moment. And so what mechanisms are already in place within the Woodland Carbon Code? And we already have small project and basic monitoring within the Woodland Carbon Code. And for anyone that's read through it, the basic monitoring does allow for kind of some fairly basic aerial remote sensing using drones or satellites and things like that to capture images of woodland compartments. But it's how we can build on that, and how we can kind of incorporate what already exists and kind of move it forward and build it out to make it a bit more robust. And so what is good enough? It's quite an important question for us, because we can get caught up in trying to measure things to its absolute. That might be a step too far. So like I mentioned, ideally working from a small project or basic monitoring method and up, it'd be really nice if we could produce something that was fairly modular. So there's allowing a range of abilities and requirements. So we have a broad spectrum of clients within the Woodland Carbon Code. It could be a small landowner or farmer that's put aside a part of their land. They don't have a huge amount of skills. It's not a huge income generator for them. So they want something fairly low cost, but that they can comply with the Woodland Carbon Code. Equally, we might have an organisation that's put in £1 million+ into a project. They're really looking to get their woodland carbon units out. They need it as part of their auditing process. It's going to go towards their net zero targets. But they're bored. They want something where they can monitor on a interval that's greater than every 10 years. So they might want something they can look at every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever it might be, and just make sure that their project is moving along as is expected. So we've got this kind of wide range of requirements within the system. And also, it'd be really nice to allow participants to increase their kind of calculations as they go along. So it might be someone that joins in at an early stage. They're doing it as an investment. They're not really trying to release as many woodland carbon units as early on as possible. They've got their PIUs. As the price of carbon goes up, it suddenly reaches a point where actually they can afford to increase their remote sensing options. Maybe they get someone with a terrestrial laser scanner to come out, do some of this bespoke allometry, and then they can release their woodland carbon units. But that's not something they planned for at the beginning. And then really importantly as well is what we're promoting, we need it to be compliant with peer organisations. We don't want to stray too far away from what other organisations like Forest Research, for example, are doing, or what the scientific community are recommending. We don't want to go out on a kind of lone ranger approach. We want it to be very much acknowledged within the industry that it's good practice, best practice. And the other part of this as well is because we are a UCAS compliant or registered organisation, we need it to be relevant to the ISO standard. It needs to be signed off. So whatever we recommend is going to need to be individually or independently verified by someone through UCAS. And then one final example I wanted to come to very, very quickly. And this is coming back to the species stuff. And I do apologise, on the slide it was a bit clearer, but there are links to the papers. Now, species is really, really, really important as far as woodland carbon units are concerned. We use the Forestry Research ESC tool, so the Ecological Site Condition tool, which gives us an indication as to what trees are going to grow best in that location when it comes to calculating woodland carbon projects at the beginning. And so we need to make sure that the species that have been planted are the ones that are growing, and we need to be able to calculate the carbon based off of those. And ideally, we'd have an automated way of being able to fly an entire site or scan an entire site and get those species back, and it kind of match what was derived at the beginning of the project. On the left, we've got something that uses phenology, which is looking at the life cycle of a living organism over a period of time. In the case of trees, that's going to be budding, leaf on, flowering, leaf off. On the right, we've got a convolutional neural network, which is using machine learning to look at species. Then there's a plethora of methods that people have tried out for doing species ID. Some of them are more successful than others. Some of them are getting down to the species level. Some of them are just kind of doing genus or family. Some of them are really complex and they require a number of different data sources in a very difficult data pipeline to produce an output. Some of them are a bit more straightforward and do just use something like photogrammetry from drone-derived data. However, there's a number of questions around this. So if we take phenology, for example, that paper that we're looking at now, that recommends the best time of year to do a mono sample rather than a time series is in spring, summer. So if we were to recommend that as part of the Woodland Carbon Code, we've also got to account for spring taking approximately 3 weeks to move across the United Kingdom. So what time period would be best for people to go out and do that survey work? And again, these are just questions. These are kind of some of the challenges that we face in trying to promote remote sensing within the Woodland Carbon Code. But on that, I would just like to say thank you for listening. I do apologise for some of the presentation hiccups at the beginning. If anybody has any suggestions or ideas or things they would like to discuss, there's my email. Please feel free to reach out and get in contact.
So yes, all that's left is to thank you all for your time today and thank Leon very much for a very interesting presentation on a very important topic, which I think will have important implications for the Woodland Carbon Code. I hope you found today as fascinating as I did. Thanks again, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.